This is the Unweird Podcast. How we talk matters. Sports is a bridge to difficult conversations. Welcome to Unweird, the podcast where we make it normal to have tough conversations that America often avoids. At Keep America Moving Ahead, we believe that differences in opinion should lead to discussions, not division. Today, we're talking about how we engage in those conversations, the way we listen, challenge, and respond. Because how we talk matters as much, if not more, than what we say. And what better bridge to these discussions than sports? A space where people of all backgrounds come together, set aside differences, and play for something bigger than themselves. Today, we're joined by three leaders. One, Nate Boyer, who has lived this firsthand and who brings unique perspectives on unity, leadership, and meaningful engagement. Nate knows what it means to be a leader in high-stakes environments. He is a former Green Beret and NFL player, but more than that, he's a bridge builder, someone who has dedicated his career to making conversations that feel impossible possible. As the filmmaker behind the Indivisible series on the NFL Network, Nate traveled the country exploring the cultural divides that challenge our unity, including a powerful conversation that he had in New Orleans about 5 years ago about criminal justice reform, education, patriotism, and what it truly means to be American. His work proves that while difficult conversations aren't easy, they're essential. Also joining us is Alana Odom, who has spent her career at the intersection of law, justice, and social change. Alana is the executive director of the ACLU of Louisiana and one of the most compelling voices advocating for civil rights today. Our third guest is Alejandro Perkins. If we want to build bridges, education is the foundation, and few people know that better than Adam. A respected attorney, civic leader, and longtime advocate for educational access, Al has spent years working to connect communities through knowledge, dialogue, and leadership. Together, our guests will explore what it takes to create real, meaningful conversations in an increasingly divided world. And more importantly, how we make those conversations unweird. So let's get started. Well, first, welcome all of you. Thank you very much for joining us. Like, as we tell people all the time who come to do these tapings with us, the work that we're trying to do at Keep America Moving Ahead is not possible without our coalition of folks who are trying to do exactly the same or similar things. Right? And for the most part, we're talking about process and how we talk, right? Not the substance of the issues as much. We want to get there, but we got to help people learn how to have the conversation. Right? And so as a part of that, prior to starting the taping, we were talking about this. We've got a cadre of student ambassadors that we're building up. There will be community ambassadors joining us as well, all across the country, so that we can, instill in communities the processes and abilities to have constructive conversations that we hope then turn into lasting solutions. Right. And the other big thing with us is we tell people that politics certainly influences how we react and do things, but we hope to impact politics far more than it affects us. Mm-hmm. Right? Because at the end of the day, politicians really do still work for us. Right?
That's awesome. Yeah, they do. That's good. That's a good point that you make. They do. We elect them, right?
Right. We got to make sure they are reminded of that, especially in times that are difficult like this, right? Where people are kind of uneasy. Some are uneasy, some are giddy about what they think is happening without really understanding what's happening. And so, to that end, we've got to help people sort through that, right? So my first question to you all will be this, actually, because you're all communicators in some way, shape, or form, both in your professional lives as well as in your community-oriented lives. What's the best tool you use in order to get people engaged in a way that doesn't alienate them? Let's start with you, Lana.
No, yeah. I just had a conversation. Hopefully it was unweird. Hopefully it was a cool conversation with a colleague of mine who we share politically, I think, disparate views. And I think it's really important to start with a common set of facts. So he asked me if I experienced racism on a personal level and what that's been like in my life and my career. And I shared the answer that, yes, I believe I experienced racism, but largely the racism that I experience isn't personal racism, it's more structural racism. And so kind of helping to define for him what that actually meant, right? Like, how do we relate to people generally? I mean, I'm a woman, I'm a younger woman, I am a woman who has a certain amount of education. Those are privileges, right? That help me in spaces where I'm dealing with people one-on-one. But as it relates, for example, to systems of higher education or banking systems or other systems that have structural racism built in, where my face and my voice and my heart don't matter, it's who I am as a person, educational systems, things like that. So sharing a common set of facts and really kind of defining that, because many times when we're talking across the aisle, we're not using the same words and we're not using the same definitions, right? We're thinking of two different things and we never really find a meeting of the mind. So when I said to him that I don't experience as much one-on-one racism, but the structural racism that I find, my dad and I being stopped by police because my dad's a dark-skinned Black man as we ride on the highway, that is structural. And that is something that I feel, we all experience as Black people. And he really understood that, I think, a lot deeper because of the conversation that we had.
I appreciate that answer because I know I can relate to that as well. I say it jokingly now, 20 years later, but it wasn't funny at the time. But when I was an assistant U.S. attorney, I got stopped in front of a housing project. This is New Orleans, so everything is close to each other, right? So we can be at a $1 million house in one block and housing development in the next, right? And so I'm driving up on the streets at almost midnight, and what was at the time seen as a nice car, I suspect, but got pulled over and stopped. And when I asked the police officers, why, right, the only answer that they gave me was that it was late. And around here, is what they said, things are dicey, right? And so,
yep.
And I did not reveal to the officers that I was an assistant U.S. attorney. You weren't supposed to do that anyways. You're not supposed to play the part, right? And so I did, but I let them go through the motions. What they hadn't realized is that I had also texted my cousin, who was at the NOPD and a ranking officer at the NOPD at that time, just to make sure if something went awry. It's a shame that you had to think about that first, but it was the first thing that came across my mind, right? To be on alert. He wound up coming out to the scene before it was done. But, it's something, that is not unlike things that could have happened to people. And we had a little bit of this conversation earlier of other races 100 years ago when they were treated with fewer civil rights than they enjoy now, right? And I speak specifically to Italians, Irish, Asians. There was a time when they were seen not as privileged, right? And were not given the same rights. And so because it was a longer time ago, right, sometimes you have to have these conversations to remind people they're not as far removed, and the grace that needs to be given to those who are still undergoing some of that structuralism has to be there. But, Nate, from your perspective, Nate, and I look at it twofold from you. One, clearly, you've been in locker rooms, you've been in the Green Beret, so you've been in high stakes situations from both a national safety perspective, but then also from a personal safety perspective in football, right? And communication and understanding with people matters, right? You were certainly thrust into groups that were very diverse in both arenas, I would imagine. How did you bridge the communications gap, or was there?
Yeah, no, it's interesting to think about because I actually grew up mostly in El Cerrito, which is right between Berkeley and Richmond in the San Francisco Bay. And, Berkeley, everybody kind of associates it with, hippie central, and Richmond, people would say, oh, that's a tough neighborhood, and it's a rough neighborhood because there has been, gang violence in the past or whatever that is, right? And so they kind of quite quickly associate anybody from there as like somebody that's a product of that maybe, right? Or somebody that just is, I don't know, like it's ingrained in them in some way. And then in El Cerrito, like kind of being in the middle of that, you would think growing up that I would maybe understand a little bit of the crossover and connection there, and maybe even that it's not necessarily true, but I think until I was in the military and until I was in those sports locker rooms and I was actually working with those people that had a different experience than me, that didn't look like me, different religions, different race, whatever that is, and really have like in-depth conversations. But beyond the conversations, like, for lack of a better term, sweating together, working together, trying to like solve a problem together. Do you really see through all that stuff that I'm not going to say it doesn't matter, because it does. People see those things, but the core of who a human being is, to me, is not that does not define them as who they are, right? Not until then did I really kind of get a sense for that. And I say a sense of it because I'm never going to fully understand what it's like to be anybody but myself, right? And my experience and what I've seen and been a part of, and the world, the eyes that I can see the world through. That's the only eyes I'll ever see the world through. But I know it was those times, and then going overseas, and working alongside Iraqis and Afghans and people from other nations as well, where even more so the divide is there, because it's a completely different culture, and like what is seen as acceptable versus not, morally or ethically okay versus not. It just changes. It's different in all of these places, and working with them, different flag on our shoulders, but same mission, and trying to, figure out a very complicated situation, which was the global war on terror, we'll say, and getting to know them on at least at some level, and understand that we laugh at the same things, we want the same things generally for our families, for our neighborhood, for our community, for our society, whatever that is. Like at our core, we are so much more similar. But it took doing that, even though because I always thought, I just assumed, and it was arrogant of me to assume that, but I came from a pretty diverse area. I get it. You know what I mean? And I really didn't until, as you said, I was sort of thrust into those locker rooms and kind of, it's not, you don't pick your team. You know what I mean? Like, I guess you kind of do, but you know what I'm saying? Like you get
how team works.
Yeah, you go to basic training. You're just in, that's your platoon of 50 people from all over the place. You know what I mean? And same with sports. And so they are important places to kind of, at least for me, they were very important places for me to grow in that way. I still have a long way to grow, but I never would have, it wasn't until I was around that I realized how little I actually understood and knew about the experiences of other people from different walks of life that probably never even voiced or maybe even saw or understood the challenges that they were facing that I didn't have to face because of the way I look. And anyway, I'm rambling, but it's a good question. It's a tough question.
Hearing you, not to cut you up, if I'm hearing you, what you're saying,
You should cut me off. I'm going too long.
But if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is that while you understand and accept that you will never fully be able to understand someone else's life position
Right.
based on
I'll fully relate to it.
but you certainly can appreciate circumstances around that, right? And you
She articulated it in half the time and twice the clarity, but whatever.
But at the end of the day, right, that's essential to communication, right? And so I know from your perspective now, that you as a lawyer, particularly one who works in and with people from different backgrounds all the time, especially the work you do with education, but even more so than that, just a general level of how it works, right? You have to have some sense of what both of our other guests have said, right, about how you interact with people and what that really means. But tell me how you implement that and how you keep the conversations where they need to be.
So what I've learned is listening is a tool. It is a tool. Sometimes it's one that's underrated, not often used. And then being an empathetic listener is also great. What I've learned in dealing with very different backgrounds of people is to not come in trying to convince somebody that my way is the way. First to say, let me understand what's your origin story, because we all have an origin story. No matter who we are, we all have an origin story. And so you take any movie, and now everybody's doing a prequel, right? And you go and you find out the origin story. You're like, oh, that's the reason why
That's why the Joker's the Joker.
Exactly. That's why. That's why.
Then the prequel.
Then the prequel. Exactly. He's like, oh, that's why Wicked. Oh, she wasn't that bad. I think we all have an origin story story image, right? And everybody's staying. So sometimes when we're in the present sense, what we have is we just hear the present plight of someone. And really didn't start off as a plight. It was really, what is their origin story? How did they get there? And you have to want to know them, right? If you're really looking at trying to be a solution, trying to come up with solutions. If you're trying to come up with solutions, you have to be patient and be able to listen to them. But does that mean that after you listen, that person gets a custom-made program for them? No, but it's taken in consideration. What are some of their concerns? What are some of their backgrounds? What are some of the things that they have used to overcome to get where they are? Because no matter where we are, we all did something to get here. And when you know that origin story, you can pick up different things that they have done that have helped them get here that you can possibly use, one for yourself and two to get others here. So the goal is what? For us to all get to this positive side. And this kind of goes back to what I said. Everybody kind of has a common goal. Everybody wants to take care of their family. Everybody wants to be healthy to a certain extent. Nobody really wants to see a violent outcome for anyone. Those are some general common things. So the question is, we all got here in different paths. What worked on the way? And then build our toolbox. So that's what I try to do, is try to listen to how people got to where they were. And then try to backtrack and try to figure out, okay, that's an interesting story. There are probably others like that. And if I look at that person and deem that person as a good worker or a good advocate for something I'm doing, I want to find more. I don't think any of us want to be limited to one person. We want to find more. But part of that is you have to unpack everybody's origins.
A question on that. How do you think or can you coach empathetic listening?
So I think one of the things that I think empathy is a practical skill-based thing. You can talk it, but you have to put people in the situations of it. If I take lawyers, I think we all can relate. Nobody likes the feeling of a deadline that you think you may have missed. At that point in time, that becomes a common feeling. All of our stomach ache for that because we know what's at stake. Or in sports, when you see someone injured and they're still laying on the field 30 seconds after the hit,
right?
And you know the longer the time goes, the more severe this starts coming. You immediately, without anybody coming and tell you verbally, like, you should be empathetic. You know, because of your common experience, that this man's livelihood is at stake right now. It's bigger than a touchdown right now. Will he walk? Will he be able to speak? Will he live? What's going on? And I think getting us down to our common basis of it and understand we're human first. First and foremost, we're all human. And if you can take everybody down and show the human side, then I think when we've had those moments, the empathy comes. But just teaching the word empathy itself may not work, but understanding there's a common base for all of us. No matter who we are, there's a common base for each one. And I think it's the human experience ultimately.
I really agree with that. And I think on a practical level, something that you can do when you're doing empathic listening is actually to repeat back what someone has told you and ask if you got it right.
Right.
Right? Literally. Like, so if we're having this conversation and you share something with me and I say, okay, Nate, what I think I heard you say was this. Did I get that right?
Right.
What that does immediately for someone else's nervous system is it lets them know that you've heard them. And constantly what we have the opportunity to do when we're in conversation is either exacerbate somebody's central nervous system or calm their central nervous system. And being seen is a way that calms people's nervous system. So even if I don't agree with you, if I'm checking in with you to make sure I got what you said, listening to not just to react, but to actually hear what you said and then to respond later on based upon my understanding, that's a really good practical way. It's very tricky to do, but it can be done. We can start teaching our kids this from very little, which I think we have to do. And then once that's practiced, it actually works really well because people feel seen and heard. And if you feel seen, you're more likely to give grace to others when they're sharing something that you may not necessarily agree with.
And it takes, right? It's not easy. And you gotta commit yourself to understanding it is going to take more.
Absolutely.
And I think in today's world where many people are already just short anyway, right? Because, we were having this conversation with my team the other day. It's a hard place to be right now in the world, Jen. Right? In that, there's always something that is going on that can lead to stressful moments, stressful days. Right. And you're not a part of it necessarily directly, right? But you're around it and you see it and it's happening. And for various reasons, right? We we have a blog series with and one of the blogs that's coming out soon will talk about how the algorithms in the social networking that we have can drive some of these more perilous titles to you, right? Even and even to this point, right? Some people who are trying not to be frightening to others, right, or drive them to the negative that the title might have, are using those titles to bring people to the more positive message, right? You got to figure out how to communicate, right, to get to people. But the big part of that is, you got to be committed to the feedback you get from the things you put out, right? When we first started this endeavor, admittedly, part of it was my inability to know how to use the Facebook and Instagram web to prevent and filter some things out. But I was getting a lot of comments from people who thought we were something we were not, right? And they were very negative, very ugly. And I would engage those people to try to bring them to understand where we were. And some, were just still, it didn't matter what I said, it was coming back to the negative because that was the reason they were in that film, right?
Right.
But he kept saying, you can't keep it. It'll take all day, you can't rest. And it's like, I hear you, but I am compelled to do this, right? And I said, I'm not going to do it to the detriment of our mission and what we're trying to do. But right now, I feel like I have to do it. And then subsequently, 6 8 months later, I'm much better at figuring out what was driven either by a bot or by someone whose only purpose to be there.
It's a living human on us.
Right. But again, it's a challenge. Right? We got to work through them. And all of us, I know, have been in rooms with people that others might see and say, how are you in the room with that person? How do you talk to them? They're horrible, blah, 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 right? When you're in that kind of a circumstance, and generally, I would say in my experience, most people don't fully know the other person. And so I don't ever try to justify their actions, right? That are presented, that are truthful actions. But what I will often try to do is make them understand why the conversation is still there. And, when you're in those situations, right? Has it been your experience that you find having the conversation gives you a different and meaningfully different perspective of that person who may have gone into the room also feeling like they're so far gone from the point of view I'm bringing them? This is really kind of a waste of time. Like, any one of you want to jump?
I mean, I personally, I think, yes and yes. Like sometimes and sometimes. I've definitely gone into a conversation where I've had a feeling that like it was going to go a certain way, or no matter what this person said, just because of my assumptions around maybe there's things they've said in the past, or way that they've acted, or what they stood for, or what they were co-signing for on. But then, especially if you get the opportunity one-on-one, we were kind of talking about this before the interview, but just like beyond doing, important work for lots of people, having relationships, conversations, moments one-on-one with people, and where you're able to sit there and actually make eye contact with them and really see them and hear them and make sure that they're hearing and understanding you as well. I think guards go down and people may, I don't want to say admit to things, but say things that would surprise you. You know what I mean? Or like, and it'll help you. It helps me understand more, even if I still adamantly disagree, why they feel that way. I like the origin story of it, like you were saying. But similarly, I've also had conversations too where, and maybe it's because they just don't want to let that guard down, or they don't want to concede anything as if it's losing, because it shouldn't be a game. It shouldn't be a win or a loss. Or like you'd said a little bit, Al, about the intention is not to prove my point. You know what I mean? My intention is to be understood, and I want to understand you. Because if you go into it with that mindset, and if they feel like you're coming into it with that mindset, the guard is up, the castle walls are built. Like, good luck having a real conversation.
I think a lot of things is that the defense is being up is a big thing, because a lot of our decisions are predicated on something that we've done before, and done before. If all of a sudden, if I concede something, that is not maybe just that moment. That concession may all of a sudden knock down 200 decisions that you have made. And if you are an influencer, possibly other decisions that other people have made as well. So a lot of pride is caught into that piece of it. And so what I try to do is, how do we create safe spots to have those conversations? A safe spot to say, you know what, I know your constituent base out there may not believe what you believe in this, or my constituent, but right now we're just talking. And I think when you find that, you will find a situation where people will let their guard down. I think I've been in very strange situations where a group of people have asked me to step into a leadership role who I would have never thought that this group would come together and want me. I mean, it doesn't even make sense on paper. But it didn't. If I would take all the elements of who this group is, it didn't mean. But what happened is that the mission became bigger than all that background stuff. And it became like, we want a success reward. There are certain qualities that we believe that you have. So part of that too is respecting it, again, what everybody has a certain level of value. I do believe that God has blessed us all with that. How we help ensure it with others, I think we all have some part of it. But people recognize success too. So it's like in sports. I don't know if I like that play. Why he's calling that play?
Right.
And then they say, he goes in for 6. Best play in the world. And I think ultimately we all want to score. That feeling erases all that down. Like, why did you call that? Now, you have some personalities that even after you score the touchdown, they're still on the sideline asking, why did you call that play? It's like, dude, we won. So you do get personalities like that. But I think we keep our mindset on how do we win together.
All right. So the moral of the story to me sounds like it's a good thing that we exist. We don't just exist on paper.
That's right.
Or in film. Right.
That we exist IRL, like the kids say, in real life.
Which is so different from all of our generations. We grew up you had to learn how to talk to people face to face and look them eye to eye and have a firm handshake and do all of this. Now they can do these 2 thumbs, leave it, and gone. It didn't matter what kind of collateral damage that message caused. It doesn't matter any of that. You don't even have to. You can send that message and delete that person at the same time, and whatever impact it had, you can walk away. We weren't allowed to do that in growing up. You had to own that conversation and those words that you did that you may have had with me.
At least in middle school and high school, that person would just follow you and keep talking.
Exactly.
That's exactly right. Or they tell you they see you at 3 o'clock.
See you at 3 o'clock. Meet me in the bathroom.
We have time.
In the quad.
This kind of brings me back. So we said it earlier, this kind of a reunion of our conversation 5 years ago on Indivisible. And to your point earlier in this last segment about the conversations and difficulties thereof, during that Indivisible session, you had a conversation with Ivan Neville and Mitch and Andrew from New Orleans. And y'all discussed how true patriotism requires confronting hard truths. At one point you said we have to get more comfortable with being uncomfortable, which was profound then and even more profound now, in that is the root of most of the dysfunctional conversations we have, is that somebody's not willing to give up enough of their own selves to be uncomfortable with what you're bringing to the conversation, and accept that, hey, it might be right. But that being said, you made that statement and it was great. Then back and we say, okay, well, how do we help people sit with that discomfort, right? And see it as a step forward rather than an one, right? Not that I want you to try to remember 5 minutes.
No. I remember
But yeah,
clearly. Yeah.
put you in that space.
Well, first of all, I'll relate this to something that when it was told to me, it made a lot of sense, and it relates to this topic. But when you go to the gym, right, the intent of a lot of people going to the gym, especially if you're an athlete, right, you want to get stronger. You maybe want to get bigger. You want to get faster. And the only way, or the best way to do that in the gym, is to use resistance training, right? Often weightlifting. And what you're doing, yeah, I'm telling you. And what you're doing,
Very
he knows.
He does know that.
But when you're doing it, you're actually tearing your muscles. You are tearing your muscles when you're in the gym. And they grow when they are repairing after the gym. That's why you need to recover, right? But when you're doing that and it's uncomfortable, it's not, even for people that like to work out, if you're pushing yourself, it's not comfortable. You're out of breath, something, the muscles are aching, whatever it is, but you are actually like tearing things. Discomfort. You have to have that discomfort in order to grow, in order to become more comfortable, actually, with the way that you feel, the way that you look, whatever it is, the way that you're performing, if you're an athlete. And so I remember being up, we were on this woman's terrace with Mayor Landrieu and with Ivan Neville, and we were looking out at where the Robert E. Lee statue once stood, right? Lee Circle. I don't know what is it called now?
Freedom Circle. I call it Freedom Circle.
Freedom Circle, Harmony Circle.
I suggested because of
All right.
We all call it something different. We know one thing. It's not Robert E. Lee Circle.
Did they put something else up there yet? Not yet. I heard it might be a trumpet. I heard it might be Louis Armstrong. I don't know, but they need to put something up there. But anyway, we're sitting there, and that's what we're looking at when this conversation was happening, right? And it had just been removed maybe a year or two before, something like that. And we call cut. We're wrapping out of there, and the woman's apartment. I don't know how production found the place. They found the place, and this woman agreed to let us shoot on their balcony.
That apartment is for sale.
Is it?
Currently, yes.
I should buy it. I can't afford it, but let's all do it. But everyone was kind of leaving, and she comes out, and she was an older white woman, and she was very sweet. But it was thankfully after Mary Landrieu and Ivan had left. But she was like looking at this thing, and she said something along the lines of like, "I can't believe they took my statue." And we were like, "Oh my, do you know what we're doing here?" Like
She didn't.
And you know what I should have done, and I regret, is have a conversation, have an uncomfortable conversation. I didn't have to be rude. I should have asked, why do you feel that way? And then maybe if I was offered the opportunity, provide my perspective, which isn't Ivan's or Mary Landrieu's, but my perspective of why I think it's probably right that it's no longer up there. But when I think of like Unweird, and I think of things I've done in my life, people will be like, "You're crazy. You do the special forces thing. You never played football, and you went to Texas and played. Like, that's crazy." And I'm like, no. To me, crazy would be having these dreams or these goals and not ever trying and not pursuing and going to my deathbed regretting and wondering what if. And I think that there's an unweird conversation, like a weird conversation or whatever you want to call that, an uncomfortable conversation it is absolutely essential for us to keep growing as people, as individuals, as a society. And it is crazy if we don't have them. You know what I mean? It's crazy to go along and just not say the things you need to say to the people that you love in your life, to the people you've never met, the people you disagree with. Like, I think that is, maybe that's some of why we're here. I don't know. But like, I think it's super important. And anyway, I'm glad you brought up that segment, because that has always bothered me. And I wish I would have. It's crazy that's for sale though.
Yeah. What I'll tell you too is this. So I think I may have said this to you before. So I led the commission here in New Orleans that renamed some of the streets that were named after Confederates and things. Right? And so that required lots of public engagement with different communities, with lots of people who had the same sentiment that this lady in the apartment had with you. Why are you taking this away? You think it was bad with the statue. The people who lived on Robert E. Lee Boulevard,
Oh my gosh.
were completely like, what the heck is really going on, right? But one of the tools that I still use and that I used at the time is something called the locker room, right? Where you first assume that everybody in the conversation is on the same team, right? If I assume that, then you have to walk your way back from that in order for me to treat you differently, right? And so I now, kind of try to stress to the folks who listen to our podcast, who read our materials online, that take these kinds of tools into your everyday life and conversations. Because at the end of the day, if you walk in assuming the person is different, the conversation is going to stay different and be very weird. Mm-hmm. Because eventually you're not going to hear something because you're predisposed to thinking they're going to say something. And it may be something that's a breakthrough for them, that if you heard it correctly,
right,
you weren't looking at it through that biased eye, right, of them, you could have had a breakthrough, right? And to your point, if you had had a conversation with this lady about why the statue was no longer there, it could have been a bigger breakthrough that then she would have, gone and said something to someone else, that ripple effect, right?
Totally.
In their own.
You're making me regret it more. Thanks, Carl.
Oh, yeah.
Carl, it's interesting that you say
No,
that,
no,
because
but
sometimes
thank you.
when you're having those conversations, those tough conversations, the person may not be saying anything, right? But sometimes their lack of words, they're just listening. Sometimes that's absorption, right? And I think all of us would love to have the immediate satisfaction, the Matlock moment where everybody say, okay, you're right, I get it now. I'm about to live a different way. But sometimes when you're dealing with social thinking, it's a slow release, more like a slow release pill. We don't know what may have changed just simply by y'all having that conversation, just because you didn't get a conversion right there. Somebody converted on the spot.
She probably watched the show. I hope she watches. I hope she watches the show.
She did.
Yeah, he was there. Or you know what? Maybe she brought that same conversation to somebody else the next day and they did have that. Sometimes we want to see the finish line of every conversation. It doesn't work like that. And
That's a good point.
so when we're looking at our art from trying to do the right thing, sometimes we don't see all of it. But we know we have to do whatever it is. Our conversation, just the fact that you even had any conversation.
Yeah, right.
But absorption of information takes time, especially when we start trying to change generational thinking, right? And sometimes we have to understand it is a slow release pill sometimes. It takes time to have it. We all want to convert right then and there, but it does not. It does not work like that in reality.
Right.
That's a good segue to the next thing I want to talk about. To the question to you, Alana, is back to the same indivisible conversation that we had at Good Chases. At one point, I want to get you to where we move beyond raising awareness to action, creating action, right? And so during the indivisible taping, you asked, how do you move people? How do you inspire people? How do you create motivation? I'm sure you remember that. To anybody who's listening out there, this show should come back because it really was. It was inspiration.
Thank you.
And
We're
that's
trying.
the motivation.
So
But so you've had those questions, and we see more conversations happening now, I think, than we had before. Even if they're not all fruitful, we are seeing more conversations. But what are those conversations leading to? What are they leading to real change? And in your world, you are certainly in the mix of more substantive conversations. Do you feel that there is some actual meaningful change?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we're in a really challenging time right now. And I think there's always the greatest opportunity comes out of the greatest challenge, right? So sometimes I think when our backs are actually up against the wall and we are facing the most significant, I think, opportunities or adversity, we do have a chance to make change. And I think where we stand right now is there's absolutely nothing that we can get done politically unless we're having conversations with people on the other side of the aisle. When we could get things done just as Democrats, we didn't have to speak to other people. Republicans now feel like they don't need to speak to us because they have all the votes that they need and they have the White House. And so those times are, you get really polarized. But I think in this moment, you do have to actually have those conversations. And, with regard to what we're doing, we are starting bipartisan criminal legal reform conversations because there isn't anything that's going to get passed in the state house and Senate unless we're actually kind of looking at data together, studying trends together, deciding where we can find common ground. We have to do that. And I mean, one of my heroes is Brian Stevenson, and he says something that we're all more than the worst thing that we've ever done. And when I'm thinking about this, that favorite quote that I have of his in the context of conversations, we're all more than the worst thing we've ever said, right? And realizing that people say things for a lot of different reasons at a lot of different times, especially in the political context, it is more important to kind of get underneath what some of those kind of, one-liners are, or, sound bites that might be on television. Because if we do actually want to make change, we are actually going to have to partner together and actually find those spaces of common ground and be able to find places within our policies where we have some compromise. Nate spoke earlier about vulnerability. I don't know if you said vulnerability, but you were kind of leaning into this idea of when you sit down with someone who you have opposite views with, it's a really neat trick and a strategy, but sharing something about yourself that doesn't make you look or sound powerful or doesn't give you this like greater sense of reputation is a really important thing, because when you're vulnerable, you invite someone else to be vulnerable. And that is something that we have to do. Vulnerability is the strongest way to connection. It's actually our strongest way to get to courage. That's Brene Brown, not me. But we have to start those conversations with people who share different views, but vulnerability and really leaning in is a way to do that.
I'm gonna give you a little bit of hope because I know Al will understand this too. So in my work, when I do government relations work and have done the last 20 some odd years, and in Al's work in actually legally representing some groups that fit into the groups that you just spoke about, right? The conversation with those groups actually happens more often than the public is aware. The actual compromise from those conversations happens a lot more. And the reason why is because what plays best in terms of public engagement are those moments, right, that you spoke of before. And inevitably, the gamesmanship of politics, right, often not just confuses, but obfuscates the general public's ability to see that there is conversation happening, right? The results that happen may still come out in a way that make you think those conversations didn't happen. And I know from my experience, it took me a while to get used to just having conversations isn't going to change the outcome sometimes, but at least that time, right?
Yeah.
Now, 2-3 times down the road, you might have gotten a little bit more because they started to see and really hear the perspective better, right?
Or you could enter a different political time, right? You can't always have the political moment that you want. Sometimes the stars don't align, but having multiple conversations, the political will of the country shifts, the leadership changes, Congress changes, different electeds change. We have a disaster. We have a terrorist attack. We have something that brings people, right? The longer that you live, something is going to happen to you or for you that changes your mind about the way you used to think, right? And as long as you can kind of keep checking back in with people over their lived experience, you may have an opportunity to connect deeper with them.
But with that, though, still comes the risk of having the conversations, right?
Oh,
so
yes, always.
And we sit here currently in the Memorial Convention Center where Super Bowl activities are happening, and the NFL experience is behind us. If you can hear any residual noise, that's what it's coming from, right? And literally, you're at the pinnacle of a football season where everybody's working to get to this moment, right? You got all these athletes who are out there and have done over the course of the year more than just be athletes on a team in most instances, right? When we met back and we did the Indivisible, part of the conversation revolved around work that Demario Davis was doing, work that Steve Gleason had done as an athlete, speaking out.
Yeah.
Exactly. So to you, Nate, what I want to say is this: we know, and you know better than us sitting here from personal experience, the cost of speaking out sometimes based on your experience with one of your old teammates in San Francisco. And if you want to go into that, you can. But my question to you is today, right? And you may want to juxtapose it to back then, right? Are there more risks, you think, to athletes taking stands, speaking out, trying to move the needle than there used to be? Or do you think it is accepted a bit more?
When you say used to be, are you talking more about in the last decade or in the last 100 years? Or what?
Call it 15 years or something.
Okay.
How long ago was it when you?
I was in Seattle, but I was a Niner fan, and I got to meet Colin. That'll be 9 years ago in September. So eight years ago, essentially. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I didn't really risk anything. I'll be completely honest. Like, yes, people said things, sticks and stones would break my bones, but the words, they were hurtful for a moment, but it didn't really cost me anything. I didn't lose an opportunity. You know what I mean? If anything, honestly, it opened up so much more conversations, and like it sort of forced me to learn and get more uncomfortable, because I did that because I had the opportunity to have that conversation with him. With Colin Kaepernick, sorry. For those that don't know, for Colin Kaepernick, it became public. People knew, so then there was an expectation. Not that I am a social justice warrior or to do anything, but that I at least need to have general awareness and understanding of what's going on. And a lot of people, expected me, I think, to react a certain way before I met him, and then maybe after the conversation and after seeing what I had said and how I felt, maybe expected me to, join this team now or whatever that is. And it was like, hey, look, I am my own person. I have my own opinions. But Colin certainly risked a lot, right? And maybe lost everything as far as his career. I don't know. There's so much. There's a lot of nuance to that, and some people there's varying opinions. But it certainly didn't make things easy on Colin getting back on the football field. Like, there's no question about that. Like, it definitely made it much more challenging and complicated. But I do think, and at least I hope, because I don't actually know, but I hope. I want to say it's easier now, but at least since what happened with the tragedy with George Floyd, and after that, with the protests and how even if a lot of it was, what is the word?
Signaling.
Yeah, BS is another word, or pandering, whatever you want to call it. There was a lot of businesses, whatever, that were all of a sudden all in on this thing, and a lot of that felt very ingenuine. But with that, I hope that it made it more, or it will make it more inviting for people when they do feel, so whether they're an athlete or not, if they're a public figure maybe, but that they do have something to risk to say those things. But I don't know, because the issues persist, right? Mm-hmm. Not just that one, where, to make it clear, if people aren't clear at this point, like Colin Kaepernick was clear from my perspective. Colin Kaepernick was refusing to stand during the national anthem in protest of police brutality, law enforcement not holding officers accountable for when unarmed people of color were being shot, right? That was the main. There was other pieces to that, but a lot of people and media outlets coerced that into, he is protesting against the country or against the flag or the anthem or the military. And it's just not, he never said that. He actually had a lot of support for the military. And that's one of the reasons I wrote that open letter, mm-hmm. and was excited to have the opportunity to talk to him, because I knew I felt there was much more to this and to him than what was being reported. But anyways, I hope that it invites that more, because it's important. And if you look back, some of the greatest, if you're just talking about sports, sports heroes in history, and it wasn't popular when they were doing it often, from Jackie Robinson to Muhammad Ali,
right,
to Billie Jean King. There's so many, Tommy Smith and was it John Carlos? John Carlos, right? I mean, it's endless. But at the time, I think
very, very seldom ride the smooth path. That's my dad's quote. That's
good.
He says it all the time. But yeah, you have to, you definitely do, you give up something. And I also just want to lift up, Eric Reed was kneeling side by side with Colin Kaepernick. His name gets left out.
He was in the conversation too. Yeah.
Think about that. He lost everything as well. And a lot of times people, all the way, people, rightfully focus on Colin, and, history tends to essentialize things in such a way that we only want one. We want one scapegoat. We want one hero. We want one villain. Mm-hmm. And in reality, the breadth of our history, like this, beautiful museum we're sitting in, there's so many people, regular, everyday people, who give up their rights in order to make it better for the rest of us. There's a really beautiful story of 4 little girls who desegregated New Orleans schools on November 14, 1960. We only know one of those little girls named Ruby Bridges. The other 3 little girls went with U.S. Marshals on that very same morning to a school in the 9th Ward, McDonough 19. And nobody knows, right? But it's important, right, for those hidden figures to become more well-known, for us to tell those stories, right? Because if we tell those stories, then we realize, oh no, wait, I don't have to wait for some special moment for history to kind of rain down on me. I have the power to make history. I, as a regular, ordinary person, not someone who comes from a special background or a silver spoon or from a special country or special place, I could just do it. Just me deciding, you know what? I want to stand up for what's right, and encouraging more people to stand up for what's right, even when they stand the chance of losing something, is actually how we make change.
And just a quick plug for the space we're in, it's Louisiana Civil Rights Museum inaugural experience. Those other 4 young ladies are featured very prominently on Green Cube, right?
Yeah.
It is purposeful, right? And it is to make sure that more full stories are being appreciated by a broader audience, right?
What's the Larry Odom quote one more time?
Trailblazers seldom ride the smooth path.
And I think, we talk about trailblazers, and nobody wants to be the first, right, to do something.
It's scary.
It's scary because you're out there and you don't know what to read, whether it's Kurt Flood and some, again, advantages that athletes are able to do in baseball and in football is, Kurt Flood, but he lost everything at the end. He didn't get a chance to see that. But even when we're looking at NIL, if NIL was 15 years ago, half of the people that got punished for stuff wouldn't have been punished. And they've been saying, hey, look, I just want to be able to make some money off of my own.
Thank God they gave Reggie Bush's Heisman, by the way.
Absolutely. But that was a major thing. And so when we look at all some of those other athletes who would have really been able to help their families, and they finished college, they injured themselves in their first year.
Mm-hmm.
But during that 4 years, they could have made a decent amount of money. They may have not been able to be the top person in the NFL, but at that college level, they would have been able to make a lot of money and be able to sow into their communities and been able to help a lot of different people. So what it took for athletes to step out, step up. And one thing about athletics that we know is that we, even the non-athletes, pay attention to what they're doing. We pay attention. That's the reason why we have a LeBron James speak up, or when we had the members of the LA Clippers, when they spoke up, said, hey, we're not going to play basketball until y'all do something about it, or the Washington Commanders. Now, again, these same type, I think the voices are being heard now, but part of it is being able to have other people to say, hey, it's all right if we say something, right now. The other thing is that we're dealing with the most information we've ever had in society. Mm-hmm. You can probably Google how to start up a social justice movement, and AI will give it to you or whatever. When we were all younger, you had to find a history teacher maybe, and they'll kind of tell you about it, and go to the library. You had to do a little bit more research. Now these kids can literally bam, 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 and do it. So I think we're in a generation where we are hearing more voices. Even seeing the players step up more. We have more vote, get out and vote campaigns by athletes that I see that the NFL is putting on. We didn't see that 10 years ago, whatever was being promoted. We have the athletes with their own tennis shoes, been able to put their causes on there. If we remember when we did this thing 5 or 6 years ago, they were being fined, for doing that. So I think there are some progress, but they say progress is measured in inches. But some things, we need to speed it up a little bit more.
There was real quick. I saw this. Speaking of information, I saw this meme or this post or whatever the other day, and it was funny. It struck me pretty raw because it said, I'm paraphrasing, but it was, "Excuse me if I didn't respond to your text. I'm being fed information 24/7 with a brain that's designed to eat berries in a cave." You know what I mean? Which was pretty funny. But to touch on what you're saying about the NIL thing too, real quick. One of the guys I played with was one of our star players, probably in 2011 or 12, something like maybe 13. Who didn't have an NFL career, didn't work out. Freak athlete, great player, but had some injuries, and they sold his jersey number in the co-op, like he was on the cover of the programs and all this stuff before the NIL. Just a few months ago, he picked me up in an Uber. He's driving Uber. You know what I mean? And there's nothing wrong with driving Uber.
Right.
It's a job. But when I was just thinking about that at that time, and I was like, man, if he was playing, even if he never had that NFL career, it could be such a different experience.
You look at the empowerment of a woman athlete right now in college. When you take the Olympics, when normally you had to be a track and field 100, 400, 200 yard dash person. But now you take Olivia Dunham, who I think is the highest paid NIL athlete, period. Not woman athlete, period. In there, she's able to make a career. You take Angel Reese, she's in school now, they're becoming millionaires in there. So we're seeing a lot of, even some of our women athletes to be able to move up in those rankings with the NIL, but it still started with somebody speaking up, and somebody has to speak up and have those uncomfortable conversations.
Lawsuits.
Yeah.
There had to be lawsuits.
That's a very uncomfortable conversation.
And the other thing too, though, with NIL, it not only helped the college athlete,
Right.
particularly on the women's side, but on professional, it helped to push the conversation for equity in the W.
That's correct.
It's hard to remain with policies that are inequitable when it's being put directly and squarely in your face,
Right.
Yeah.
right? And especially in a way that isn't necessarily really meant for you. It's just another segment of what you're doing, showing you there's a different in a better way that can benefit everyone more equitably, right? But so I wanted you all to meet, not just to reminisce over what we had done a few years back, but because I knew for certain you all would lead the conversation in a way that helped us with the tools that we give to the community to speak, right? And just now, this entire segment we just had brings in another community tool that we have, which is basically called the game film method, where you look back on the things that have happened before you start to have these difficult conversations, right? So that you're better informed about how the conversation can go, right? And hopefully when people do that, you approach it differently and you come out of each conversation with more meaningful points, right? And so that brings us to the final segment. Which, and I'll just upfront tell people that tool, it's called the post-game hub.
Right.
It is after a difficult discussion, instead of walking away frustrated, you check in with the person like teammates after a game, right? And you ask, what did we learn? What do we agree on? What one thing can we do together, right? And you extrapolate that out into your everyday community conversations about the things that are giving us angst now, right? Just think if we approach them all in that way, how much better we would do in terms of getting to a space where we approach quality through the eyes of equity and then go beyond that into a true opportunity for everyone who lives in America to have the chance to pursue happiness in the way it was intended.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if intended, but in the way that it was written.
Yeah.
Right.
The plain words of the document.
Plain words of
for
the document.
everybody.
Which are absolutely beautiful and ambitious, and some people, some experts say are impossible to achieve. Right? I don't see that. What I see in it is that the more we try, the more people win. So let's just keep trying and keep bringing more winners in, right? But as we go into this post game, would each of you just kind of tell me, especially given the hindsight of where we were in our conversation 5 years ago, where do you feel Americans are globally, where people are, right? Given the events that have happened over the last 6 years and what we can and should be doing going forward. We'll start with that.
Sounds good.
I think we're probably going back and saying we have more information probably ever had elsewhere. I believe America.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're having to filter that information. What is good information, right? We all kind of grew up in a time period where you knew if you watched news at 5 o'clock, 10 o'clock, or whatever, you can trust the news. Now you have a different social media aspect of the news, right? You have a dollar amount that's connected to the. I think we have to do better and looking. When I look back and say, I want to make sure I'm not gaslighting anyone, meaning that I can talk to someone. They may be very frustrated about whatever election results. And I can either feed that and say, oh, yeah, you're right. That is, whatever. Gaslighting, they may not be able to recover and come back. I need to make sure to say, hey, okay, I understand that. And this election result, but guess what? In 3 more months, they're going to have a local election on who's the next state rep and who's the next senator and who's the next this and who's the next that. unfortunately, a lot of our society thinks that elections only happen every 4 years. It's not true. For those of us who follow this stuff, it's almost one every 3 months. And we know that what? All politics is local. So one of the things I think we have to go beyond just saying all politics is local, but really encourage to be able to show people elections are happening all the time. You have a chance to be heard all the time. Being heard in the break room, that's great. But if you're really trying to make that impact, let's bring you out here. So I think those of us who have been exposed, it's very easy to sometimes gaslight a situation like, yeah, that's horrible. These, whatever the election in this race, I didn't like this and whatever, versus saying, all right, that opportunity did not work maybe the way you wanted to, but guess what? Here comes another one in 2 months. And here's another one in 3 more months, and there's another one and another one. So you get a chance to get another bite, at the apple, or related to football, you get another play. There's another play. Everything is not fourth and goal all the time. Sometimes you have multiple downs in this, and that's how this works in our overall.
And you
adjust. You make some adjustment, or at least tell people you did.
But that's another rule in this game. That's a tool. Right?
That's another tool. If you make the adjustments and you understand that, hey, that play may didn't work with that group of personnel that you had out there. Didn't mean that the play is not a good play. So you may see it back in the package again. I think sometimes we get in our community, we throw up our hands and say, this just didn't work. Well, man, it just didn't work at that amount of time. We all know that when certain people go out on the other team, now it's like, run that play. It'll work now. Right? And that's what we are when we're looking at politics and we're looking at opportunities in the community. When COVID happened, that was a great opportunity for us to learn about each other. And a lot of us did. We took enough time. We did more reading than we probably ever did before. We did more walking than we probably ever did before. I know I socialized with my neighborhood more than I ever did before because I took the time to actually do it. So I will say in this past 6 years or 5.5 since we last met, there's so much to look back. We've had a pandemic. We've had various civil rights uprisings. We've had the change of 2 presidents. In there, we've had a lot of stuff that has happened. But I think the thing that is constant, though, is that the 4 of us are still here. We're willing to have conversations that I believe are impactful. And I know that I've gained some tools just today to be able to take. So that will be my post-huddle review, is to say, we got more work to do, but we got some good plays to learn.
I appreciate that. That's good.
Yeah. So I think where we are as Americans is that there's a lot of hurt feelings, and there's been a lot of rupture and a lot of harm that's been done on both sides. And so I think, any real conversation about moving forward has to be about repair, right? How do you repair? Because you can kind of have a post huddle, but if you don't actually listen to others to hear how they've been harmed, the likelihood that you're going to have somebody that you have buy-in with to move forward on anything is very low. Like, imagine trying to move forward with your loved one. If you've had an argument, you're just going to pick up and we're just going to move forward, babe. She ain't having it. We ain't moving forward unless you hear what I said, unless you change and make amends. I see some different stuff going forward. That's how it is. So, right. So one restorative justice conversation that I love is this very simple model. What happened? Who did it impact? And how do we make it different going forward? 3 questions. What happened? And that's all of what happened, not just like what was said here. What happened leading up to this? What happened for you? And when the person's explaining what happened for them, you be quiet, right? And then when you say what happened for you, they have to be quiet, right? And then who did it impact? We generally think, oh, this just happened to you. But we're not taking into consideration, this might have impacted your business, your family, your community, your church, your this, your that. And then when we see, oh my gosh, this aperture is so wide of what I did or said, how it impacted someone, you're like, okay, wow, maybe I really need to, have a better understanding. And then how do we make it different going forward? It's buy-in from both parties. So unless we're really doing that repair work, I think we're really going to be stuck. And the other thing is, I love this quote so much. It's Martin Luther King. But it also started with this amazing woman named Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, who was a civil rights advocate. And she said, we're all bound up in a single humanity. And that's this idea that love connects us all. And if we can kind of get back to this idea that we're in this single garment of destiny together, there really is no way that I can fully experience who I'm supposed to be as a Black woman unless Nate experiences fully who he's supposed to be as a white man, and as Carl is supposed to be, as Al's supposed to be. Our interconnectedness, it starts with love. Hate cannot drive that out. Only love can do that. And so we really have to focus on kind of really centering ourselves on that inextricability that we have as human beings.
That's what if the
You can't follow that.
part of what you just said. But no, what you said, that, like you, I say this to people a lot too. There is no harm in mentioning specifics to those kinds of statements, like Al is a Black person, or you as a Black woman, or Nate is a white man, right? Because I'm not saying to people we want to be further separated because of those labels, but I do want you to understand the full existence of that person and what that brings to the table for them. And this whole conversation has been about our experiences as who we are from our own skin, right? And while the color may not drive the conversation, it certainly impacts it, either from the hearing or the speaker.
Yeah.
So, but you got to follow.
Jeez.
Last word. Look, you got the last word.
I don't want it. I don't want it.
On our invisible face.
Yeah, boy. What a great few games he had. That was fun to watch. I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm speaking as a nation, but I feel like we are poised for some drastic changes. I hope it's not in the form of more war, you know what I mean? But that feels like maybe. But beyond that, internally, from a political standpoint, and I am vastly uneducated on it, but I think a lot of things need to change in the way that the system is not working. I don't want to say working because I don't think it is, right? And I don't know if it's as simple as the two-party system. I don't know if it's, career politicians, or look, you work for the State Department. There's a forced retirement age of 65, right? But you can be a politician to forever, right? And make these decisions. And so many of these people are benefiting a lot, and it's just the special interest. All these things are just, it's crazy. And everybody is not everybody, but most people are fully aware of this, and we still are allowing it to happen. And they are supposed to be working for us, but it doesn't feel like it. It doesn't feel like it to me. I don't know how it feels like it for most people, but it really doesn't. And so I don't know the answer to that, but I feel like something is coming. Something is changing. And I think a lot of that, I ridicule social media and all these things all the time, but they also are very powerful in positive ways, and in ways that we are able to see what other people are doing, and the changes that they are implementing, and actions that are taken. I think of like what's going on right now that you're seeing quite a bit. Maybe you haven't seen it firsthand at all, but you're seeing it so much on social, and even the news is skating it somewhat. But what's happening with a lot of our undocumented immigrants right now, right? And a lot of the people that are making this country run, in my opinion, and doing the jobs that no one else is willing to do. And it's like, okay, so we're going to keep the federal minimum wage at $7.50, but the only people that are willing to work at that rate we're kicking out. How is that going to work? I don't know. So I just it feels like when I see those things, I'm thinking it's just a show. It's just people say they're going to do these things. Politicians say, I am going to do this. So they have to show that they are doing that. But are they really committing to doing that? I don't know, because they know that structures will break down, things will not operate. And it feels like a lot of that through social media is being revealed. You know what I mean? And you can't, as much as you were able to in the past, lie to us.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like there is that transparency that it provides. And yes, there's dangers with it. Yes, there's negative stuff. And I'm always a late bloomer. I'm always like the last one to jump on one of these platforms and do these things, because I'm always like, I don't know. I don't trust it. I don't think it's maybe bad, or I see how much fight there is, and people, and bots and all these other things. These are real things. I feel like more changes are coming. I know big changes have already happened and are happening, but more. And I just hope and I pray that the power really does come back to the people as a whole, or at least some semblance of that.
I love that point. That
I hope so.
the power of the people is always greater than the people in power. It's just important for those people to remember that. So they have to remember. That's a good point, Nate.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to thank you all greatly for this. Every conversation that I have, either individually or collectively with you all, I know it sounds cliche, but I leave smarter.
I don't know.
Like don't just talk at things, but we talk about them in ways that we can move from them. And that's essential, right? Action is essential, right? And so, and the whole point to this episode, of course, was to talk about how we build a culture where hard conversations are avoided, but they're embraced. And just like in sports, it's not about perfection; it's about progress, right?
Yeah.
And so we've got to keep these conversations going. I hope that our listeners, will leave this and they'll go out into the world and have a conversation that's difficult. Use the tools we talked about as they have that conversation that's difficult, right? And we definitely want them to let us know the results of that, right? So, to that end, you can reach us at Facebook at the Comma Facebook profile. You can go reach us on Instagram at the Comma Community, and you can reach us on TikTok at the Comma Comma, the THEKAMACOM, and on YouTube where this podcast, the Unweird Podcast, will be. And the last official thing that I will do is to welcome you all to what we call the Coalition of the Unweird.
Yeah.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, thanks. I'm over them. I'm always, and I'm taking everything. I'm a dreamer, and I'm a leader.